in, I, in, I, in conversation with Nida. I, in conversation with Nida. Notes. In conversation, in conversation, in conversation, in converse, in conversing. What's your name?
𝗖𝗄𝗃.
Zaid, conversing. Zaid converses. Zaid is also in conversation with me and Nida. Zaid also in conversation with me and Nida. Zaid, do you mind sitting here with me? Zaid also in conversation with me and Nida. My love, would you like to take a seat? You actually won't do anything, you'll just participate in listening, conversing, listening, the listening practice, a practice of conversation. I was concerned about the spatial paratext, about this elevated stage, how it leads, how it kind of frames how information is received and transmitted. Why elevated? Why can't Zaid also ask questions? Also, as a way to kind of like dissolve this expectation, an energetic expectation between Nida and I. It becomes a way to soften into conversation. So, to begin with, I thought that I would, camera, can you see me? Yeah? I thought that I would begin this open conversation with an exercise. It's called the generative exercise, known in my practice. Ring. Hello? Ding, 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 ring. So it's called authentic movement. And it's a tool, it's a device, where it involves two people. One person closes their eyes, and another person observes. And this role of observation is it's a safety mechanism to make sure that the person closed eyes doesn't hurt themselves. And then it's also a practice of reading. And they're normally timed, and wherever the alarm rings is the end of it. And the impulse of it is to authentically move. The term is debatable. There's contention. How do you authentically move? I've done this just a few times. Is it authentically coming in this moment? Has it been generated anew? Okay. My darling, would you like to take a seat? Just there. My darling, would you like to take a seat? Just there. Good call. I wouldn't either. Okay, timer starts. And anything can happen in this. I could do anything. I could do nothing. Nothing is anything. Nothing is something. I could just look at you. Not only is it a generative exercise, it's also a way for non-performers to ease into a practice of being watched. Timer begins now. Okay, Nida, I'm going to close my eyes. You're going to make sure that I don't hurt myself. Curator is carer. Curator is carer. Curator is carer. Carer in conversation. A carer, a caring conversation. A caring conversation. Curators. Nida, do you want to take your seat? Wait. The alarm, mate. Not yet. One of the physical impulses that was kind of grounding the 3 performances that I did for the Biennale was this an idea of fog. So this is physical practice was one thing, and then there were other textual impulses that was, in particular, some works that I was attracted to. It was a recurring motif. And it was something that I could do, then drop it, observe a moment that just happened, do something else, then pick it up again. Just so you get an effect. I'm fast forwarding.
Thank you for joining us today for our conversation. I'll give a brief introduction to Brian so that we can have some context. We're then going to proceed with a few terms. I'm going to pose a few terms that are important to Brian's practice, and he's going to respond to them. And then we're going to continue the conversation around past works, as well as how that led into the current series that you performed here. So Brian Fuata works in performance, often within the field of visual art, through live and mediated forms. He employs various modes of presentation within the framework of structured improvisation. In Brian's work, the act of viewing is a reciprocal action between artist and audience, and between members of the audience. So created on site, Untitled Intermission, which was the series of timed improvisations that he has been performing over the last 3 or 4 days, comprises spoken word, vocalized sounds and movement, and is a continuation of a performance he just finished in Finland at the 𝗖𝗍𝗃 Festival. The performance folds site-specific elements from the works around, as well as from the space of the gallery, into the mode of presentation that he's employing. The work's formal logic is grounded by the kinesthetic practice of body weather and framed by the concept of autophagy, a metabolic process of renewal. By removing old components, each performance both builds upon and deletes from the previous one. When I approached Brian to work towards something for the Singapore Biennale, it was in relation to a set of performance projects that he's been carrying out for the last 10 years.
Yeah, 11.
11 years. One of which were the ghost performances, and the other were email performances, and they were both very much related, both taking the kind of subject of the white sheet and the open space, or the space of absence that the subject of the white sheet evokes. And at first, Brian agreed to do something that continued, and this was also a time, we were in the midst of lockdowns, etc. And the idea of an email performance was something that was also interesting for us to think of, given that we didn't exactly know what our audience possibilities would be. And by the second conversation, Brian's like, the ghost has retired, and that there was a kind of wrapping up of this 11-year project. And I think that really, that moment was also one of exhaustion, perhaps, and that would perhaps also allow us to talk about breakdown, which is something that also we see happen in your performances. And so this idea of drawing a parallel between the artist's body breaking down and the artist's body of practice. So the physical body and the body of practice breaking down was really a starting point for our discussion, and really where you were at. And so I think those questions that, what happens after a body breaks down? How can it be put together again? Can breaking down be a means of healing and reproducing another self? When the stable unity of the human body disintegrates, what kind of connections with the non-human or with other subjects and objects around can we make? And yeah, on that note, perhaps the three terms I'll throw out, body weather, autophagy, and breakdown.
Sure. So my practice begins in a specific community of performance practice that kind of sort of began within the kind of period in Sydney from the kind of late 80s right up until now, and in particular a venue called the Performance Space, which was an institution that Natasha has worked with, that in late 80s right up until 2007 was located in this kind of run-down building that had a gallery, two galleries in the front, and then a theatre at the back, a foyer, and then upstairs were the offices and residency studios. And I found myself kind of sort of like stumbling into this community. Accidentally, I was actually on the way to work, and then I came across this theatre place that was a kind of like a kind of little sister organization to this larger project. And the reason why I state that is that it was a real formative moment, and also architecturally kind of sort of spoke to this really vibrant interdisciplinary practice that was unique to Sydney. And also then informed a kind of sort of larger kind of language around particularly a kind of sort of queer framework within of performance practices, and how that can kind of sort of like bleed into different contexts and also expand upon that form. And so I learnt my craft of that in that moment. And so this whole kind of sort of generation was really informed by Buto practice, and in particular a form of Buto that kind of began, I think it was in the 50s in Japan, body weather, led by the master that is Min Tanaka, and I think maybe he was Min Tanaka. And Min Tanaka informed a lot of the established artists around the time that I had kind of sort of entered this practice. And so it was a kind of sort of transmission of knowledge. So body weather was really kind of sort of formative to the way that performances were made, and then kind of sort of informed the way that I understand the body. So one of the elements of body weather is this kind of, it works with these kind of sort of images that what some practitioners call like image flows. And so, for example, that fog thing that I did was a way to kind of understand, well, actually kind of have a physical action impulsed by an image. And through the practice of it, the doing of it, your body generates this kind of both a physical and kind of sort of image, a weather. And then you're then kind of moving accordingly to that. And so that has been part of my vibe. And around kind of autophagy, I'd been doing this ghost practice for 11 years. And then for the Asia Pacific Triennial this year, I was curated in it and was an artist residence for a year. And throughout, like halfway through it, I realized the ghost and I had broken up. It's like, we fucking hate each other, Jesus Christ. And so there was, so the opening weekend performance, like I had nothing. And it was the most traumatic moment when like what I would normally rely on, like I just didn't feel it anymore. And it was traumatizing. And so halfway through the residency and then kind of sort of realizing that I was farewelling it, it kind of made me think about it made me think about this process of autophagy, right?
Few words about what it is.
So I was like a keto fan for like 2 years. It's really simple. And so like this process of like when you reach ketosis, like, especially through fasting, your body goes through this process of eating, like autophagy, where it kind of sort of like either kind of deletes kind of sort of like unwanted parts of the body, or it recycles. And so that then became a really kind of sort of nice way to emotionally secure myself in the next arm of my practice. Like I was kind of like, okay, so now that the ghost is gone, this kind of sort of, the image of autophagy became a kind of like, it became a way to deal with this loss. And that what we understand to be a kind of sort of like the negation of the body then becomes, and then I started thinking about like negation as a point of newness. And there are kind of sort of crossovers to this idea of negation that also responded to the politics of the ghost, where I was literally covering myself, but that was all around this kind of refusal to perform being gay or being like Samoan, and evading capture. And so I then kind of sort of like led by this autophagic impulse. I was kind of like, okay, how do I maintain this kind of like positive self-othering that the ghost had, and enter a new realm of understanding the performance of self.
It's going to be interesting to kind of see how that breakup plays out. You know, how do you actually break up with a haunting? You know, but perhaps, yeah, just to talk a little bit about the ghost performances and their relationship to the email performances, so that we can also kind of have a shared understanding for those who might not know. I mean, you employ, the figure of the ghost, both, I think, physically through this kind of sheet that you're working with, but how that translates into the email performances might be, I mean, maybe you can say more about both those, strands of the project.
Sure. So during my kind of sort of formative time at Performance Space, I was making very kind of sort of like choreographed, scripted monologues, like direct addressed to audiences, and occasionally with kind of working with like new media and stuff. And did that for quite some time, and then I started going out with a guy who was like visual artist, and I was going, oh, I like this vibe. But what happened then? And spent some time away from Performance Space and then re-entered it. And in 2006, I did this one performance where I had arranged these actions within a kind of sort of like, actions. So I called them like narrative landmarks. And so the first narrative landmark was that I would walk onto stage with a stool and then sit on it and then collapse, fall over intentionally. And then the second one was to kind of sort of pick someone from the audience, engage in a conversation, and then veer the conversation into some kind of apology. And then the last performance was then this entirely choreographed dance to a Dolly Parton song. So these kind of sort of anchors, they were kind of referencing kind of sort of like that kind of beginning, middle, end structure, became a structure. And then I then improvised in between these three landmarks. And then found, and so that liminal space of improvisation was guided by reaching those landmarks. And so, however, the night I did this one performance, I then drank a whole bottle of vodka. And so then, was informed by this kind of external input. And so then, falling off the chair, it looked like I was genuinely falling off the chair because I was so drunk. But anyway, so that then kind of sort of like laid a template of the structured improvisation. And then gradually I found myself armed with this method in my first ever performance in a gallery space. Sorry, this is so convoluted, but I think that was in 2010, and was so fearful. I was kind of sort of weighed down by the canon of visual art and not feeling kind of sort of like I had any kind of literacy to it. However, I had to perform. And so I then was like, okay, I've only just got one thing. I'm going to work with my fear. And then dress up as a ghost. And then screamed at the artworks for like a good hour. And this was at a place in Sydney called Art Space, which has like the gallery upstairs and then the studios upstairs where I also had a residency. And the first day, the first performance, a friend of mine was like, I don't know if that was genius or one of the worst things I'd ever seen, but the second performance occurred in the studio space, which then became a really comfortable space because it's known as a place of process to then perform, and then I situated a performance there, and then slowly started kind of building a consciousness between this place of process and this place of presentation. And so the ghost practice was kind of sort of like capitalized on that. I was like, okay, cool, I can now bring the space of the studio and make it a presentational space or a sense of being or performativity of the studio, and then present that as a thing in of itself. And so long story short, started kind of slowly building up a method of the ghost, and then found myself mainly doing these kind of sort of ghost performances, employing this kind of history in performance practice that had a different canon, a different kind of sort of language of the body and the object, the body as object. And then I found myself always being asked to do stuff. And then the emails then came out of feelings. I moved away for a bit from Sydney, and then found myself on a train, and then there was this bizarre, perverse scene of these like kids, what looked like they were like genuine mining gear, and they even had dirt. It was like Bugsy Malone. I was like, this is illegal. And then I texted the image to a friend of mine on my Nokia phone, and then liked the image, how I wrote it, and then out of a whim proceeded to text this image to everyone in my address book. And then, of course, I had my laptop with me and then started collecting all of the responses. And again, it was just like not an arty thing, like it was just out of like a necessity or a kind of an occupation to do something. And then that was in parallel to this ghost practice, this burgeoning ghost practice. So when I finally got home, I collected all of the responses, then turned that into a PDF, and then emailed it out to everyone. And then this eventually kind of sort of like moved into much more of an aesthetic consciousness, and then became aware of the architecture of the email has a similar kind of sort of theatrical kind of sort of paradigm. So you've got the field of the to field and the BCC field, which is what I always likened to the like the darkened seats of a theater. And so then they were happening on their own parallel. And then again, this sexy whim happened where I would, like audience members would like take photographs of a ghost performance and then send it to me. And then I decided to then make that email content, like, and then shape an email using this documentation. And then also, in a kind of mutual way, some of the text of the email performances then became dialogue. And so there was this marrying of these parallel practices.
So just to kind of briefly expand on how I understood they worked, like you signed up to, or you bought a seat basically for the email performance, and you could be in the to field or the CC field or the.
Well, yeah. No, I mean that I was curated in Performer 15 in New York, and so that's when it became a lot more like a heightened thing. Otherwise, like it was just part of my. I was just sending it to my personal thing, and it was amazing how that transmission bled out into people that, I mean, you came through it through Mike Sperlinger.
Exactly. The kind of adorning of the sheet as a way of also kind of navigating, on one hand, kind of questions of identity, I guess, and on the other hand, the sheet being a way of really thinking through the gaze, right? Like by basically diverting the gaze. But you also spoke about like, the kind of subject-object relation insofar as, in a way, the question of the human. And, but we're also talking about the object in terms of the art object, right? And then what is happening between the studio and the gallery space, and what you're, one of the early discussions we had was, do we want to continue to do something within the gallery space, which is where, your practice has often kind of occupied the space of the gallery, or do we want to go outside? And then we, decided that we wanted to stay in the gallery space. And before I let you, kind of attend to what is it that you're doing by doing what you're doing in the space of the gallery or the space of the museum, we can, for us, insofar as curating Natasha, we were already interested in the in-betweenness that is somehow often denied to the art object by the museum, which interrupts the time of the object, fixes the image, so to speak. So yeah, let's hear you both on what, what it was that you were doing by wanting to perform in and respond to works in a gallery space over time, and then then we can talk about what it has meant here.
I think there's a lot of kind of sort of like institutional critique-y kind of sort of work, or an idea of decentering that actually just like reinforces a binary between the institution and whoever the other is, whether it be the curator or the artist or whatever. And I think for me, I was kind of sort of really interested in like querying the institution and emerging from it, drawing from it, extracting from it, kind of sort of like multiple identities. So the idea that then the institution kind of sort of refers to as a kind of sort of art historical thing is one thing, but then it also is just a building that is a public building as well. And so that then my interaction was to kind of sort of find where, I mean, it's not a thesis that I'm like, that leads in it, but I think I'm just kind of sort of reading my own work. But I think improvisation in particular kind of does something really kind of like, it pixelates what we understand of how the institution may be read. And I think like, there's like, I remember having this like studio meet with this like English curator, and he was like, but that by like the institution is not like, that's no longer a thing, and I'm like, these hierarchies of the institution is no longer a thing, and I think that is false. I think that's a lie, and I think that there is still kind of avenues to explore the possibilities of that relationship, and that kind of sort of can borrow from kind of sort of like previous discourses, but then through an integration of new disciplines and new understandings of the object, can kind of sort of expand on that conversation. Does that make sense? I'm not sure. But, anyways, sorry, I lost my thought.
No, that's fine. I mean, I guess what you were saying to me today morning too was just the fact that there are certain kind of protocols or lines of behavior when you enter a gallery space, and in a way, you know, by attending to the space between, between objects and audiences, by bringing in, I think, behavior perhaps unbecoming of, you know, the etiquette of a gallery space. There's some also way in which that addresses whether that's, you know, kind of questions of class, questions of, you know, the way in which the institution in that sense extends itself beyond its physical architecture and exerts itself on how we navigate space in it. And that, you know, basically determines our body movement.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, like, it's careful to note maybe significant to note that, like, the institution is also peopled by non-art people. So, like, that includes invigilators and security guards. It includes kind of sort of educations and all the different varied departments that have no real investment outside of that project of just being a job. Mm-hmm. And so performance does still have the kind of like the capacity, the political capacity in connecting with these agents, these actors of the institution, which is why then the institution is still, I mean, and the thing is like there are all different companies as well that the institution house, mm-hmm. and that have no direct kind of sort of like communication with the interface. So that's mainly the curators or the director, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me then, performance, and in particular improvisation, and the materiality of conviviality mm-hmm. becomes really powerful. Yeah.
I'm aware we have 10 minutes, so I want to flag the fact that in relation to what you just said, for those of you who may not have been at Brian's performances over the last days, that you were wearing a security uniform, and there was a kind of referencing there to, mm-hmm. To these other kind of positions that occupy the space that, that are visible and less visible to us in relation to the kind of awe that we're supposed to feel in front of the art object, for example.
But also it speaks to the kind of sort of inherent kind of sort of like the agreed upon fictions, right? So like, I mean, it's like a friend of mine, like I posted like a picture of me in the security outfit on Instagram, and then a friend of mine was like, something about like, that's a nice kind of sort of cameo. And I was like, oh no, I'm just riffing off like Tina Segal, riffing off Tina Segal with the kind of hysterical disservice to his practice. but the thing is, like, to perform the role of the staff is to also kind of sort of like hopefully aim towards kind of sort of understanding that the fiction, the script of their position also speaks to a larger kind of sort of, you know, narrative of the institution, you know?
I have two more thoughts before we can open up to the rest. So just to continue with that, we were, a friend of yours, a friend of ours, David Tay, commented in general about Natasha, that there's probably something good about the fact that the air-conditioned nation is having an un-air-conditioned Biennale. And I just wanted to kind of extend from there to kind of, you know, and loop back to the question of body weather, where we started, to kind of ask you how you weathered that performance, and, you know, what that meant on a physical, but also what you might extrapolate from the fact that it was very, very hot.
Yeah, I mean, in the same way that the practice of body weather, or parallel to the practice of body weather, where I'm kind of sort of internalizing from the inside and then out this conception of the body as weather, there is then the kind of sort of material conditions of the gallery that kind of sort of inform the way then the body of the general public and all those who inhabit that space and how that might inform the way that they relate to a work. I mean, I think like when someone's like boiling, like their time, the duration of viewing becomes, the relationship becomes really, really interesting, because you're like, I'm just going to go to somewhere or close to an aircon, you know? And I think that becomes an interesting trigger to work with. Oh my God, you know, I was in Helsinki, Laura Provost, oh my God, it's a fucking amazing work. That work where it's like this amazing red room, and there's like this film, there's a beautiful, I was sobbing. And the temperature of the room is the body temperature. And it's like, it was such a, I love how artists kind of sort of tap into that. And so that heat informed this emotional response in relation to the image. It's like this image of these naked women, and like the mother has this, and this is like a newborn, and like there's like milk going all over the face of the baby child's face, and then the moments where even like an octopus arm is all over her face, the baby's face. So there's the image there, but then the heat became so elemental to my reading of it, and so in parallel to now, it's like.
Okay, the last, it might sound like a jump, but since it's so integral to your practice, I just don't want to like leave out the importance of writing to what you do. Also because for Natasha, the kind of relationship of language, of writing, of narrative and non-narrative, but through language, and what the space that writing has, both in an artist's practice, but also in its relationship to the exhibition itself, is something that has been, you know, kind of key. Like Natasha as a character might evoke the title of a novel, many, many things, right? Like through many of the works. And so I just wanted to kind of have you comment briefly before we have to,
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically in regards to writing is like the writing, the autobiographical writing, or writing of the self. And also just writing as a practice is like this creative practice of self-othering, right? And so I've always drawn parallels between, you know, writing and performance. They are both as a physical act, a performative act, but then also share a kind of sort of conceptual, they share a kind of sort of conceptual paradigm within which then the self is objectified, literally. And so, which is why then the email became really, really, well, lasted so long, because I was talking to Firas, who was saying that like he's just started this performance practice, and it's like his first ever performance practice, and he was like, in terms of performing publicly, he never does that. However, where there is a kind of sort of performativity is because he's a gamer, right? So like that public gaming discourse has a similar kind of sort of performative vibe. And we then spoke about this, how the act of writing is also then draws parallels to this kind of self-othering project.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a good note to stop on. Like also, I think the road that June was taking us on when she gave her opening remarks yesterday, that in a way, the kind of question of naming as peculiarly human activity is in a way also a way for us to kind of question the assumptions of humanness itself. And I think, even this idea of autobiography as something that is in fact the objectification of the self as a way for us to kind of think through and break that down and not be so sorry about it.
Totally. Which is why then, like, there was the subtitle to the performance was Untitled Intermission, subtitled Subject Breakdown. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Back to the breakdown. I'm gonna open that up if there are any. We have June.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. I really enjoyed your performance yesterday because I guess I haven't had so much chance to see you perform, so it's really fantastic. And well, in relation to what Nida was talking about, when we first were thinking of having you within the Biennale, we were thinking of the email performances, and so it was quite an interesting journey for us to then see where you are right now. So my question has to do with this part. Besides what you do with Body Weather, the connection of Min Tanaka, and in one of your bios out there in the internet, it says that you were trained in post-dramatic theater. So my question to you is, with all that you're doing right now, what are you post of? And where are you heading? What are you heading to? Yeah.
Right, yeah. Post-dramatic theatre is actually just a term that kind of sort of like a theoretical term to encompass a practice like these kind of sort of avant-garde theatre practices. I think Hans Thiesman. And why that term was so significant to my community was that it was kind of sort of like prioritizing this kind of like contested space between text, language, and the body performing that. And so I'm still, and there's a kind of like, is it ontological? there's a kind of sort of existential condition of post-dramatic theatre that has a broad reach to use as a mechanism of critiquing wherever it's played, like, particularly for me in the last few years within the gallery, the institution. So, so I guess like I'm still in it, and again, kind of like stretching its capacities. I think there are still interesting tendrils that are alive. Yeah. So post anything? Yeah, I mean, like, also because, like, I mean, that kind of prefix is kind of sort of like such a, it's like post-racial, really? Like, I think we're still in it. Like I think like we are still in COVID. Like it's not post. Like yeah. But firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for coming up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Brian, I got a chance to see your performance yesterday, and there's something really deeply present about how you activate space. At least that's how I've felt. I felt you really activated the audience too, and also similarly just now. It's slippery, and I'm thinking about why I'm so drawn to your work and how it makes me feel like it makes me question what I'm, like how I am in the space as well. I'm wondering how you build relation to your audience. A lot of what I observed today and yesterday are really creating encounter, which is in some ways challenging to the audience. I wonder how your audiences have reacted to you with your performance practice and how you in turn build relationship.
Yeah. I often have said that for me, performance is a kind of tonal management of energy. And often for me, the technique in order to kind of sort of manage, the technique of management is, again, this conviviality, this kind of sort of casualness that, and so humor becomes a way to kind of sort of soften people's reception, not only to the paradigm of the gallery, but then it's a strategy. And I think it also borrows from a kind of like a theatrical trope of presentation, and dare I say, it becomes conviviality or humor becomes a tool of manipulating. It could be perceived as manipulation, but for me, I think it's much more of a kind of way to, again, soften the gaze, so that then if someone has just laughed at a joke, that kind of sort of pixelated breakdown of the fourth wall then allows people to accept anything that may happen regarding, whether it be like after, like say for example, there were moments yesterday and even today where, you know, people were chuckling, and that was like a really great, and then I would just break out into this dramatic, and so this moment of high drama can only be possible because I've laid the foundation, the ground. I've tilled the ground with this kind of softness. And it's like, I guess you could say it's a kind of sort of parasocial kind of sort of result that this casualness kind of sort of creates. And so people feel comfortable with me. Yeah. And I mean, prior to the actual performance is also and what is as important, laying the conditions of it. So a friend of mine, Agatha Gottsnape, is an amazing artist, and we perform a lot with each other. She terms it as a kind of scaffolding. So it's creating the kind of sort of like social scaffolding within which then a work can kind of like can maintain the agency of its abstraction. And so without that scaffolding, then people are not interested. Yeah.
You.
Shall we? Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Brian, for speaking with me. being in conversation. Thank you all for staying so close. Yeah, hope to see you around.
Great.